welcome everyone. Thank you for joining, and particularly thank you to Dennis Liu to be our presenter today. I'm excited for the presentation. It's great to reconnect with Dennis. Housekeeping wise, we are recording this call. It'll be available online if people want to share it with their friends. If you have a question, put it in the chat box and we'll call on you to ask the question. Otherwise, if you can do like you're doing and mute yourself, that would be great. If you'd like to be an Upstream Alliance subscriber, then send a note to Erica, and Erica will sign you up. And I think most people here know about Upstream Alliance, so I won't talk much about the Upstream Alliance, but a welcome to Dave Harp, the great photographer of the Chesapeake that's joined as well. And then finally, let me just introduce Dennis. Dennis is a longtime vice president at the Howard Hughes Medical Institute. And if you had yourself or a son or daughter, or maybe a grandson or granddaughter that has taken a biology course anywhere in the United States in the last 30 years, very likely that Dennis personally enhanced that biological education, because he was the brains behind the Howard Hughes Medical Institute's investment in their education media, invested probably hundreds of millions of dollars into science education, and really just a brilliant thinker about science education. And honored that he's joined us tonight. Since he's, I guess, quote, retired from Howard Hughes, he is now working with the E.O. Wilson Biodiversity Foundation on behalf of her project. And to be quite candid, I don't know a whole lot about it. I've read in the bio, and kind of, I think all of us are kind of fascinated to learn more about it. But Dennis, you great stature in science education. We applaud you for that, and particularly thank you for joining today.
Well, Don, thanks so much. Thanks so much for the invitation and for that all too generous introduction. Yeah, I mean, I think, but I will mention, when I met Don, what must have been nearly 25 years ago, when I just was starting at Hughes, and I was running grant programs. And Don, I'll just want to say, Don was one of the lights. I mean, I just really enjoyed meeting him, loved the programs, and then it was a total bonus that he wanted to get me out in a kayak. I had moved to the Washington area from the Pacific Northwest, so I'd been a coastal kayaker for a while, and it was just great to get some familiarity with the kayaking culture, in and around the Chesapeake. And, honestly, Don, it was just so great getting to know you that way. So I'll go ahead and basically I'm going to give you a little introduction to our foundation and our Half Earth project. This is also a good entree. My training was in molecular genetics. So to the extent that I had some influence and success through Howard Hughes Medical Institute, that was in the days when it's almost like molecular genetics uber alles. All teachers, any biology teacher was almost obsessed with getting up to speed and keeping up to speed. And I did my research in molecular genetics, but I was always interested in the outdoors and in broader aspects of biology. And I like to think that this sort of second career now of mine has been sort of looking up from the microscope and looking out the window, and the big questions and the big problems are out in the world out that window, and really students really need this. And molecular genetics is not going to become less important over the years, but it's much more become a tool. And in education, there's much less of an obsession that somehow we have to keep up with that. So the world of science keeps expanding, and you always have to pick and choose your context and the stories you're going to tell and how best to engage people. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I did put together some slides. Here we go. Hope everyone can see those slides okay. I'm going to go ahead and I guess I'll go ahead and play the slide deck. Yeah, so I wanted to be sure. So here's my email. Just get that right up top. I would love to hear from anybody. I just think this series of talks that the Alliance has put together is is great. I've listened in on a couple, and it's really been a great experience. I think, you know, Upstream Alliance, you know, represents the kind of, in a way, our project wants to be an umbrella group for a whole variety of different conservation efforts. Now, I think probably most people in this audience have heard of E.O. Wilson, but I'm just going to go ahead and give some introduction. E.O. Ed, as I'll call him, Ed turned 92 this summer. He's currently working on 2 books. He is one of these unusual scientists because he's a deep thinker. He's got the real research chops, but he writes beautifully. So if you know about Ed, you probably know about some of his ideas, including some controversy even with some of those ideas, and you probably are familiar with his writing. And he's really associated with the term biophilia. I'm sure everyone listening right now has biophilia. It's that innate love of nature, maybe particularly the place that you grew up in. He's really promoted the term biodiversity, which means we can't just think of single focal species or charismatic species. We have to think about all the species. He's been a real promoter of something called the BioBlitz, which I'm sure most of you are aware of. It's basically, it's both an educational and engagement event, but often when you do a BioBlitz, let's say you focus on Central Park in New York City, it's not unheard of to actually discover a new species when you do a BioBlitz. And then probably least familiar is island biogeography, and that is one of Ed's major research contributions. It basically means as the intact natural area goes up, the number of species that area can support goes up by a log scale. And that's an important basis for our project, our principal project of the foundation, the Half Earth Project. Now Ed, as I mentioned, you know, Ed is a great writer, so he's really known for his books. I just wanted to highlight a couple of them here. Half Earth, which our project is named for, was published in 2017. Another really important book, especially for educators, is Letters to a Young Scientist, which is really his effort he's just trying to encourage people to follow your passion, follow your curiosity. And in that great way of his saying, we need you. If you're interested in these things, if you have questions, you need to stay engaged with that, pursue it. My personal favorite book of Ed's is Naturalist. It was first published in the mid-90s. And it's really his memoir. And it's about how did not necessarily very promising youth with not all the advantages, but also not all the disadvantages, but just a regular kid who was obsessed with snakes and bugs and frogs, how did he come to be one of the leading conservation thinkers in our world? Now, most of you have probably read about Ed Wilson, read something of his, but as I go around talking to students and teachers, unlike when I'm talking to a scientific crowd, there's a lot of young people who have no idea who Ed Wilson is. So I'm excited to say that Naturalist has now been adapted in a graphic form, and it's going to come out in November. It's been trimmed down to just over 200 pages, and I'm super excited about this. I'm working with educators right now to build some lesson ideas and activities around this graphic interpretation of Ed's story. I just want to show an example of what this looks like. What I love about these graphic treatments have become increasingly important in English classrooms around the country. So I do still mostly work with science educators, but I really like to reach across the disciplines and get, and you know, through Common Core and the next generation science standards, there's a lot of encouragement for cross and interdisciplinary learning. I mean, what I like about the book is you can see Ed is in a graphic version. Instead of him remembering, he can be present with his younger self. I like this thing, I like this frame here where they break the frame and his younger self is actually handing a discovery to his current self. So anyways, look for that. If you visit our website, you won't miss this publication. And I'll just, while I'm on this topic, I've been putting together a reading list on, and it's completely idiosyncratic. It's admittedly really just based on my tastes and what I've happened to read and come across. So I've been putting together a reading list, and I've put the URL for this. If you go to the Half Earth Project website, you'll be able to find the reading list. I've had interviews with some of these authors, so that's a fun dimension of it. And I've also been able to, we build lessons around it, and we've been able to get the publishers to give us sample chapters so that, again, teachers and students can use these things without necessarily having to buy the book. Actually, while I'm on the reading list, I've been trying to make, obviously there's two dominant things as well. My opinion, there's two dominant things going on right now. One is obviously dealing with this pandemic crisis that we've been in. But the other is this yet another cycle in, I'll phrase it this way because of my age and such, but it's another cycle in the civil rights, the ongoing saga and battle for civil rights. And, I do feel that this current moment feels different to me than it has in the past. And I feel hopeful for real progress. One of the things I can do in my little way is just to try and bring more diverse stories to my audiences. So I just want to point out, The Home Place, which is by Drew Lanham, who is, he likes to joke back in the day, he was the only black bird watcher that he would ever encounter when he was out in the field. He's a professor at Clemson University. It's just a beautiful memoir about how he grew up in South Carolina and he, like Ed Wilson, on a totally different path, became obsessed with nature. But I also wanted to mention, most people know that Christian Cooper, a prominent black bird watcher in Manhattan, affiliated with New York Audubon Society's on the board. He had this altercation with a woman who happened to share his same last name, but that spawned a whole movement around black bird watching and around, for me, it really helped focus the lens how even in what's kind of, this loving nature and conservation, I've never, I had not thought strongly enough about some of the civil rights issues associated with that. And so, this birding while black has been a really strong and influential thing on me. And I just wanted to mention that Christian Cooper has just published a short graphic novel called It's a Bird. And it basically puts a lens on this issue in a very impressionistic way. New York Times had a nice article about it. And so if you look up It's a Bird graphic novel, Christian Cooper, you'll be able to find it. And it's only available in a digital version. But anyways, my main point is there's lots and lots of these stories now, and there's no excuse for not bringing more diverse voices into the conversation, especially when it comes to education. I just wanted to put my resource page up here. If you visit this page, you can see a whole variety of things that we offer. One of the big things is a map design challenge. It's basically, it's to engage students in thinking about what does half Earth mean? What would it mean to protect half of the United States for the rest of life? It involves teamwork and actually hands-on work with hands-on maps, because it's not good practice to just send kids to some digital tool, even though we have a beautiful digital map I'll introduce you to in a minute. I just wanted to mention, among those resources, like I said, there's different books. Eager has been a very successful book written by Ben Goldfarb. I have a nice interview with him on the website. We put together some resources. Ben won the Penny O. Wilson Literary Science Award a couple years ago for this book. And so here's me video chatting with Ben. And then, but here's an example of the kind of thing, how we try to make something like a book chapter, give it some more educational impact. This is a before and after image of what beavers can do to the landscape, how they can restore a wetland. And then you can do a data analysis to actually show that biodiversity is increased on a beaver influenced landscape compared to the equivalent landscape without beavers. And then to just close this kind of almost like introductory portion, I just want to mention that our big celebration every year is Half Earth Day. It's October 22nd, meant to be halfway between the Earth Days. This year is going to be a virtual event. So again, if you go to our website, there'll be science talks, there'll be education talks, a variety of trying to showcase sort of half-Earth stories and some of the impacts we've had and some of what we're hoping to do in the coming year. So now, I'm not going to belabor this point, but why am I here? Why are we here? Well, there is a biodiversity crisis. Again, I know this is a really well-informed audience, but in the last couple of years, there's been a couple of big stories about biodiversity. The one that really broke first is the loss of insects, right? And they call it the windshield effect. People used to take road trips back in the day. In the summertime, your windshield would get so caked with bugs, you'd need tar remover to clean your windshield. And so from that sort of observation that lots of people were making, there's actually been long longitudinal studies, especially in Europe, showing that there's indeed a very a big decline in overall populations of insects. And then that study was followed by a study done by the Lab of Ornithology at Cornell in partnership with American Bird Conservancy and Audubon. Basically, and this is really an interesting thing, using a lot of citizen science data to show that even common birds that we think of as common, that it's easy to go out and see, that are not on any imminent extinction list, their numbers are decreasing alarmingly. It's not true for every species. Some species are actually increasing in numbers, but there's a big change. And I always make this point, especially with students, because I think almost the media's obsession with extinction is a problem in some ways. And the IUCN's red list is a problem because extinction is the end of an irreversible process, right? We cannot afford to get to that point. So we really have to pay attention to these abundance issues. And if you're in the IUCN red list at least concerned, that doesn't mean no concern. It actually means you should be concerned, but not as much as the other four even worse categories. So we just have almost like a semantic problem. So, I don't know if people can see this because of the way the screen is up, but the only solution to the sixth extinction is an increase in the area of inviolable natural reserves to half or greater. So this is Ed's response to the ongoing biodiversity crisis loss, and that's really what Half Earth was about. And our project is really designed to take that book and turn it into a series of initiatives to try and actually make Half Earth a reality. And as part of that, we really are building a movement culture. We're a small foundation. There's so many good conservation organizations. So we want to be sort of a rallying call and to have a a constant focus on species and biodiversity. So that's really our differentiating factor. This is a picture of Greta Thunberg, which is on a building in San Francisco. So, you know, we've all seen the impact that these movement cultures can have. The point I like to make here is, you know, I'm in the business of helping teachers educate the next generation. I'm all about the next generation. I think these generations coming up are awesome and they get it in so many ways. But, you know, we're in this mess because of us. So it's not like, you know, well, let's like train them to fix it. It's great to be inspired by Greta, but even Greta says, I didn't do this. I'm here basically to hector you folks to do something about this. So anyways, we have programs for the discovery of new species. One of the main things we're doing is mapping biodiversity. Again, on a global scale, the really important thing for everyone to get is life is not evenly distributed on this planet. And that has all sorts of ramifications for conservation. Of course, we want to inspire and educate. That's kind of my main bailiwick. We want to build communities because, again, we all have to be together. Conservation works. Part of Ed's idea is that, but we need a big goal to bring all these efforts together. And so that's, and we want to provide tools for taking conservation action. And so I think Ed says it best. He says half Earth is different. It's a goal. People understand and prefer goals. They need a victory, not just news that progress is being made. It's human nature to yearn for finality, something achieved by which their anxieties and fears are put to rest. So, you know, this is sort of Ed's distilled wisdom over the years, serving on so many boards like World Wildlife Fund, realizing we need a big goal to reach for. Now, one of the things that Ed always says is we live on a little explored planet. So if we were in interactive mode, I would ask the audience, how many species do you think there are on planet Earth? And I'm not counting the bacteria, but insects, small things that inhabit the soil. But with the exception of bacteria, how many species do you think there are? I don't know if anyone wants to put some numbers in the chat. Is anyone in the chat? Anyways, the answer is we don't know. We really don't know. So we've named almost 2 million species. That means they have a proper Linnaean binomial name and some description, a good enough description that we know they're not just a funny version of a species we already know. And the estimates just vary crazy from 10 to 30 million, the total number of species. But what that means is, for example, on the Chesapeake Bay, there's no doubt there's tons of yet to be discovered species. And this leads to another thing, another phenomena that's been accelerated in the last couple decades, which is that species go extinct before they can even be described. And Ed has coined the term centennial species for a place in Ecuador where a small scientific team had found a bunch of endemic plants only found there. When they came back to fully document the site, it had been logged. So they don't even know. They know they lost at least dozens of species that never got to be described for science. Now, you might think that these species are mostly obscure, but I want to give you an example of a bird discovered in Ecuador in 2018, now named the blue-throated hill star. This was a brand new hummingbird, never named before, undiscovered hummingbird, lives in a it's what we call range limited, endemic. It only lives in a very small habitat in Ecuador. And at the time this bird was discovered, that region was threatened with logging. They're estimated to be between 300 and 700 total members of this species. And the good news, again, is that conservation works. So now action has been taken and this population looks stable. But this is just an example. This could have been a centennial species. Luckily, fortunately, it's not. Now, I just wanted to go, I just wanted to mention, kind of formalize why we should care about biodiversity. And I look at it in there's two main ways to think about it. There's, you know, aesthetic and ethical, which I think, you know, traditionally, and as I thought about nature growing up, this was actually the main thing. There were the sort of the nature lovers, the tree huggers, some, you know, often used as a disparaging term. But I think there's much greater recognition now that there's really important aesthetic and ethical reasons to value nature. It's good for our health. You know, my personal, what brought me into all this is that I think species are fascinating. It's just endlessly fascinating. And I think it's important to acknowledge that they have a right to exist. They have their own interests. And this goes across many cultures, many different traditions. It's, you know, the notion that the rest of nature is here just for us, that is not a dominant cultural thinking. It's just come to pervade the world under the current system. But of course, it's important to point out there's utilitarian reasons also, and that's going to tend to get more traction in the policy realm and in sort of in the real world with economics and politics. And it is a fact that we absolutely depend on functioning, healthy ecology for our drinking water, for clean air, for food, for energy. We're completely dependent on it. No matter how you live, how removed you think you might be from nature, you are completely dependent on these systems. And by the way, these systems do not depend on us. It's the insects and the smaller things that are running this system, and we are reaping the benefit from it. And again, Ed says it really well. He calls each species a wonder to behold, a long, brilliant history in itself to read, a champion emerged in our time after a long struggle of thousands or millions of years, best of the best, an expert specialist in the niche of the natural environment in which it lives. And again, I think this is an important thing. When I talk with students, there's a natural tendency to think that there's a hierarchy of life or that some organisms are, I don't know, better than other organisms. Every organism living today is in a long continuous line from that original spark of life on this planet. Each one is a master of their environment and of the niche they play. And yet we understand that function for only probably several thousand species. On the utilitarian side, you know, Ed makes the point that biodiversity as a whole forms a shield that protects each of the species that together compose it, ourselves included. And so as we erode this shield, extinction is going to accelerate, and it's going to damage all species, and maybe importantly, including the human species. So when I talk about half Earth as a goal, the most common question, of course, is why half? So what this slide is just to summarize the very basic thinking in terms of this. So lots of research shows across the globe in many different habitats, and some of this comes from Ed's original biogeography work. If we can save half of the environment for biodiversity, keep it healthy for biodiversity, we should be able to get about 85% of species maintained. And that includes, again, that includes the undiscovered ones. Furthermore, 85%, other research shows, is probably adequate for intact ecological functions. Again, those functions that we depend on for clean air, clean water, etc. So why half? And then the next big question is which half? And that, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but that's what our mapping effort is really about. It's to map biodiversity across the globe, make a good, reliable record of the protected areas that we have so far, and finally map that against human activities and impacts so that we can identify and prioritize the best places that should be conserved, both locally and then of course on a global scale, to make a network that will keep the ecosystem intact. So I'm just going to give you, I'll just run this quick screen movie just to show you, encourage you to go look at the map. These dots on the map that you're seeing now, these are priority places that have already been identified. If you visit the map and you click on one of these blue dots, you can get some more information about what lives there, what sort of conservation work is going on there. So these are the 3 layers: biodiversity, existing protection, human pressure. You click on biodiversity, you can, for example, let's look at all of life and how it's distributed as far as we know currently, and you get a heat map of rarity and richness of species across the globe. I just clicked on the conservation tab, and this shows protected lands across the globe and in the ocean. You can see that there's marine reserves. And I just want to zoom in. Hopefully Amazonia is familiar here. If you add community-based conservation, you see that in a place like Amazonia, those community lands, which have been really threatened the last few years from bad politics, that's almost half of the protected area in a place like Amazonia. So our goal right now, our map is 110 square kilometers. We're trying to get that down to 1 kilometer. That way, you could literally use our map to look at the structure of protection in your town or neighborhood. So we're working toward that higher resolution. Right now we have mostly the 40,000 vertebrate species represented on the map. We have a few key plant groups, and it's just a lot of work, but we're trying to add as many taxa to the map as we can. Now, I'm vice president for education, so I just want to say a word about some of the education work and how that relates to building a movement culture. And again, you know, harking back to my initial comments on sort of this moment in equity and justice and inclusion, you know, I've been struggling with these issues my whole career in science education. And what's interesting now is the teacher population in the United States is actually still skews white. And it's an amazing contrast to what classrooms look like in this country today, especially in urban areas. They are amazingly diverse places. So I have educator ambassador program. We have about 500 ambassadors, mostly high school science teachers, but also middle school teachers and college teachers. We have a weekly newsletter where we share information and activity ideas. We have a Facebook group, which is a private Facebook group so that teachers can share ideas on their teaching. This slide is meant to show you, again, even though we have this digital map that I previewed for you, that before we get to that map, we want to have a hands-on team activity. So we've put a lot of effort into developing a mapping activity that is purposely meant to appeal to a breadth of learners and to shift the status in a classroom. The classroom is probably not changed as much as you might think from when many of you were in school. It's still largely this industrial model. And so we're trying to do our little bit to change that up as many organizations have. So there's been a lot of progress, but not as much as we'd all like. So, and one of the key things is, as I mentioned before, challenge the students to come up with their own design. Then they will generate the questions and they will be motivated to do the research and they will be motivated to communicate and even argue about the issues. And so when the challenge is something like put half of the United States into protection for biodiversity, suddenly they have to, like, who owns the land? How is the population distributed? Where does our food come from? Where are there currently forests? All those sorts of great questions come up. And you could spend an entire course on just this seeding it with just this kind of topic. Now, so hopefully once we've prepared students, there are of course ways to engage with this map. And part of my job, this map is meant to be a decision maker's tool, but you can use, this map is powerful, potentially powerful for education. I just want to show one example I really like here, which is, you know, send students to the map, ask them to click on the hummingbirds under the biodiversity tab, and suddenly you see here's the heat map for hummingbirds. Now, as I'm scrolling through the globe, I hope you see that the whole world is gray. Poor Africa, poor Europe, no hummingbirds. Hummingbirds are an American group. We have the richness and the rarity. I hope you can see Amazonia has lots of species in the Andes. And in the United States, on the West Coast, there's probably on the order of 17 species. Guess how many species there are here? If you're in Maryland, you have the opportunity to see one species of hummingbird, the ruby-throated hummingbird. And this heat map represents about 300 to 350 species of hummingbirds. So they're an amazing group. And again, it's this sort of, I call it a guided inquiry. Plant a few questions, show a few things, and then get students to do their own exploration. This is just from our data partner at Yale, the Map of Life. They put together the biodiversity distribution data for our map. It's another great website, MOL. I'm showing this one actually just to, again, make this point about citizen science today. So the green and the yellow colors are what we call expert maps. So if you use a bird book and you page through and you see like, where does something live? So this is another great questions for students, like, where do these maps come from? How do we know where anything lives? It's not as easy as you think. And the traditional method for this was expert drew a map. And that's, you know, oh, what happens when the expert maps don't agree? Well, hopefully we can take the best out of 7 and that's where we'll draw it. Well, today that kind of information is augmented by all this citizen science data. So all these gray dots are actual observations. So in this case, we see that the expert maps have good agreement with on the ground observations of where species actually are. And then I just want to show this. This is another thing I like to use because again, when you think about where species live, how do they live, often what's missing is the time element and the seasonal element. And in the case of birds, so many beautiful birds that we're so fortunate to have in our country, they're migratory. They're migration champions. It's unbelievable what they do. So this one hummingbird that we get to see out east here, the ruby-throated hummingbird, must winter in Central America. So if you're trying to protect the ruby-throated hummingbird, can you just protect a few nesting sites in the United States? No. So it's important things like agroforestry, you know, better ways of bird-friendly ways of growing coffee can support the birds in their wintering grounds. And then we can appreciate them when they come up here to feed and nest. Well, actually, I think I'm ready to wrap. I feel like I talked too much and I can't see whether people had questions, but I just wanted to leave with this slide that has some links. Let's see if I can, yeah, there, I can just take it off there if people want. But of course, this is recorded. Anyone can email me. I can send you more, you know, more information, you know, point you more specifically to things, but I'd be happy to hear from anybody. And I think with that, I'll go ahead and I'll give you another 10 seconds and then I'll stop sharing my screen. You can think if you have any questions. All right.
Well, Dennis, wow, what a great work you've done since Howard Hughes. It's impressive. How long has it been since you've been on this project?
I started in this project in 2018.
Uh-huh.
The foundation, years ago, I was actually asked if I was interested in working with the foundation. I had got to know Ed through a variety of different things, and obviously I had this great position with Howard Hughes Medical Institute, but they really didn't have a formal education thing going. So a couple of years ago, I started talking to folks with the foundation, and thought this would be a really great opportunity to, and I've really emphasized formal education, which means classroom education, but there's so many other important dimensions to this: nature centers, museums. There's lots of institutions to partner with. I think David has a question.
Yeah, are you familiar with the Eastern Shore Land Conservancy's Delmarva Oasis program? It's modeled on Half Earth, and I've been on the board for a while, and it's one of our.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, no, I'm embarrassed to say I actually don't, and I would love to learn more about it. Please.
I will see that you do.
Yeah.
I will. Yeah.
So because sorry, please.
Well, that's basically, it's based on E.O. Wilson's Half Earth philosophy or a program, and we want to save half of Delmarva for nature, and it's the primary program right now of the Land Conservancy, Eastern Shore Land Conservancy.
That's so great. Yeah, it's such a big world out there, and I'm it's hard to keep track of everything that's going on, and so we do have a program that we call Communities for a Half Earth Future, and this would be a perfect fit. So we've been engaged with several different organizations that have done the same thing. They've come forward and say, hey, we were inspired by you, or inspired by the book or your project, and so it'll be fantastic to connect with you.
Okay, thank you. It was a lovely, wonderful presentation today.
Well, thanks. I sometimes what I try to do is tailor it, because all of our tools can be used to zoom in, for example, on your community. But I figured in this case, you all knew much more about the Bay than I ever would. So I didn't want to embarrass myself. So I thought I'd just stick with the general overview and encourage you to check out the MOL and the Half Earth map for yourselves.
Great.
Hey, so Janet has a question. If you want to get off mute and ask to Janet.
Hi, Janet.
Hi, Dennis. That was awesome.
Oh,
thank you. I don't know if you addressed this and I missed it, but I'm curious what % we're currently at compared to the 50%.
So we're at about 15% on the land in the United States.
That's actually protected?
Yeah, so I won't get too wonky about it. Again, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature has a database and a very rigorous definition of protection that's generally in 4 different categories. We count the top 2 categories that focus on biodiversity. So category 1 is basically like national parks, and category 2 is like just a notch down from there. So where clearly the primary intent is to curb human impact and maximize biodiversity. So in the United States, there's a huge problem with that. A vast majority of federal lands really have no protection for biodiversity at all. Those lands are conserved for permanent extractive uses. The other problem is there's great private land that is well stewarded, especially through land trusts and conservancies, through really good, solid mechanisms. And so we're working toward finding ways to include those lands. So in the case of the United States at 15%, that's actually probably conservative. We probably have better protection than that in the United States. In the oceans, it's more like 8%. And the ocean is a very different environment for all sorts of reasons. And it's interesting too. So the new version of our map, we're going to introduce national report cards, which I don't like calling them report cards, but again, we're just looking for ways to engage people and for them to measure progress in a sense. So if you look at that, the United States at 15% is almost at the global average.
Wow.
But we have set the standard for what protection means. And as dire as the times can seem, the truth is that the United States, we're solid. The data we put up to the international databases is good data. And by and large, when we protect land, it's followed. Whereas in some countries, you've probably heard the term paper parks. You've got a national park that's been hollowed out to make a palm plantation.
Wow.
So there's all sorts of detailed issues, of course, but yeah. So
Well, the other half, if I can ask another part to that question, is how much of the land is possible to preserve, or how much is already used up? Because
yeah,
curious
so
what
this is
we're up against.
exactly what the students have to struggle with in our design challenge. And they quickly realize that they need more than just these few maps that we've given them. I mean, and the other question that comes up is what counts? So do we just mean, like the Northeast Wilderness Trust, who I have done some work with, their commitment is forever wild. So they either they allow very little human incursion on that land. But lots of things can count toward half Earth, right? Eliminating invasive species, reestablishing native species, corridors, modified agricultural practices. So again, we're looking for ways, and it's actually encouraging to me. I get contacted, people want to, how do we get credit for what we're doing? So we really don't want to be like a certification kind of thing, but it is important to acknowledge all the work that people are doing.
Hey, Mary Jo has a question. If you want to get yourself off mute.
Didn't I see something recently from the Sierra Club that they've set a 30% target or something like that?
Yeah, so I don't worry about this too much, but it's sometimes a headache for folks at the foundation. So here's what I'd say. The good news is there's amazing consensus that the right target is half. So National Geographic, other organizations have gotten, and including the UN, have gotten behind this notion of 30 by 30. And they acknowledge on the way to half. I don't have a particular opinion about that. I think Ed may feel more strongly. 30 by 30 risks just this, what we've been doing for decades now, which is kicking the ball down the road. And, and Ed's like, we need to work faster than that. But anyways, my opinion is we're together on these things. And I'm happy with 30 by 30 if it has that stimulus of getting collective, action and collective attention focused on this.
What about the oceans?
Yes, so the goal is the same for the ocean, but it is a much more it's a very different place for all sorts of reasons, right? On the one hand, so oceans are just very different because the way things move in the ocean is different than on the land. And obviously you have to deal with this depth issue. So we roughly go by the surface, and for now we're saying 50% of the surface will get you to that goal. I mean, especially again, if we're prioritizing places like coral reefs, the rich, the unbelievably rich richness of like the Philippines, Those are the clear hotspots for biodiversity in the ocean. So the ocean is included in these various targets. And again, as you probably know, National Geographic has a very strong, we partner with them on some things. They have a very strong initiative on the oceans with Enrique Sala heading that up.
So Dennis, we're kind of winding down a little bit, but here's I'm in the business of selling hope.
Yeah.
And so what are some hopeful messages that we could put out there?
Well, I don't have it up yet, but just like I've been collecting readings, I have a whole list of conservation success stories. But I'll answer your question a little more generally, right? Because I think the conservation success stories, I mean, I think they're great, but they're another example a little bit, and it's important for people to get that message. It's not that we've failed. Conservation works. It's just that, part of the notion with Half Earth is that, it feels like a never-ending battle and people want to measure progress. So that's what we're trying to do. So, I mean, I get most hope from the response that I get from young people and their engagement in this issue. And and it runs the gamut. I love it. Like I'll give a talk and there'll be kids who want to contribute, and they ask, how much money do you need to acquire this land? And I mean, it's just so great. So I think that's what gives me the most hope. And, their teachers, I think it's really important to acknowledge that they're teachers, and I think to some extent they're parents. So I do think students influence their parents and they influence their teachers. I just see a lot of good coming out of that. And, how we all feel so polarized now and almost unable to have anything resembling real discourse with anyone except those you already know you agree with on most things. Kids are not like that. And, the classrooms that I've interacted with across the country, they come from all sorts of perspectives. And some, I've spoken to plenty of I would just call majority conservative classrooms. And those kids are willing to argue with each other and listen to each other. So again, even though I feel like we have got, the adults in the room have got to be working on this issue and not sort of thinking that the kids are going to take care of it. But at the same time, it's just you're just automatically drawn to the fact that unlike most of the adults you talk to, you feel like you have a chance to get through with a kid, that they'll actually listen and maybe even, change their mind about something. So.
Well, thank you for the hope. And so why don't we finish with Dave Brown's question and then summary comments you might have. So Dave Brown's question is not an easy one. Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, so first of all, it was a great talk, really interesting. I'm just curious, to the extent that one can generalize, can you say something about the support for either the 30 by 30 goal or the Half Earth goal in resource limited countries, developing countries, countries that want to really the standard of living of their population by consuming resources?
No, it's a really important question. And I think a little bit embedded in there is, and I should have explicitly mentioned, I mean, we have to be very careful of this. And that's why I've had some qualms about the National Report Card, right? Half Earth is not like, 30% of the US and all of Botswana, right? That's not going to work. So, the country I have the most experience with is Mozambique. And Mozambique is still one of the poorest countries in the world, full of resources, including the people who are there with all sorts of economic and social challenges. We work closely in partnership with Gorongosa National Park in Mozambique. And, we have the E.O. Wilson lab has been set up there. And so we have programs to support research in the park and education programs, but particularly more at a higher level than typically what I do, because we're trying, the hope there is really to train the next generation of researchers and biodiversity specialists right there in the country. There, I think it's an example of if it's really community-based conservation, and that really means you have to be in it for the long haul. You really have to listen to people, and when they tell you, elephants are destroying our crops and we can't live with these elephants, you can't be on the side of the elephants against these people. So I think the newer community-based conservation approaches mean that countries are receiving this. They're proud of their own biodiversity, but of course, as your question acknowledges, I mean, it's a complicated landscape of 200 nations out there, and each one with its own unique history, and perspective on these things. So some countries are eager to participate and contribute. Now you were a little bit focusing on 30 by 30. I don't think there's really an either or. Again, the main thing is that there's general acknowledgement that the end goal has to be 50%. But politicians are politicians. So in the case of Mozambique, it's another example where the government at the highest levels have embraced this as something to be part of and to be proud of. You have to rely on people who understand the local and regional dynamics to do that for you, to work with, to do that.
Dennis, awesome. Any other closing comments?
Well, no, I mean, thanks everyone. I guess what I'd say is I hope you visit the website. I hope to hear from some of you. I hope if you know teachers, if you know students, let them know we have this ambassador program, share our resources, help be part of pushing more biodiversity and conservation into the classrooms. And there's so many places we can do that. So like I said before, I'm excited about the graphic naturalist because it's given me an opportunity to work with English teachers, and that's just great.
Well, congratulations. Wonderful presentation, Dennis. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for your attention and great question.
Yeah, really good question. Hey, before everyone leaves, a promotion for next week's, we are all affected by the weather. And a senior executive of the National Weather Service is going to be our next presenter at 5 o'clock next Wednesday. And he's going to share as much as he can about what apps he uses. He's not allowed to promote apps and promote different sources, but at the end of it, you'll learn a little bit more about weather and a little bit more about what are some of the best sources to get your weather. So anyway, that's next Wednesday, 5 o'clock. But Dennis, thank you again. That was really cool. Really appreciate it. Thanks everybody for joining. We'll see you next week, hopefully.
Great seeing you all. Thanks so much.